So we all know what a screaming, acting out child looks like.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, if a kid is throwing a chair across a room
Or they're just, screaming in the hallway. Everyone in the building immediately knows they need help.
Right, it's impossible to ignore.
Exactly. But I really want you to think about this for a second. What if, what if the most urgent cries for help are completely silent?
Yeah, that's really the core tension we are looking at today. Because the reality is children rarely walk into a counselor's office, pull up a chair, and, calmly announce, I'm experiencing severe generalized anxiety.
Right, they just don't do that.
It just does not happen that way.
No, it really doesn't. Well, welcome to today's deep dive. We're getting into something that I think fundamentally shifts how we look at the people around us, especially the youngest ones.
Literally.
And we have a really compelling stack of materials for you today. We're looking at this fascinating briefing on, well, the 3 quiet signs your student is struggling.
Which is a great document.
It is, and we're pairing that with some actual operational documentation from a comprehensive K-12 mental health support system down in Georgia. It's called MentalSpace School.
It's a really powerful combination, honestly, because we're taking the theory of how to identify distress and putting it right next to a very practical, systemic application of how to actually treat it in the real world.
Exactly. Yeah. So our mission here is really twofold. First, we want to equip you with the tools to spot those hidden silent signals of mental health struggles in youth.
Right.
And second, we want to examine how this new targeted solution down in Georgia is attempting to fix what is, frankly, a massively broken intervention pipeline.
It really is broken.
It is. Okay, so let's unpack this, because as adults, we might be able to articulate our stress. We might say, hey, I'm feeling totally overwhelmed by my workload today.
Right, we have the vocabulary for it.
Exactly. But for a child, that distress doesn't come with a neat little verbal label. Instead, it shows up as these distinct, quiet patterns that are honestly incredibly easy to miss, especially if you're, managing a busy classroom or a chaotic household.
Oh, absolutely. And the first concept we really need to understand from the briefing is a sudden withdrawal from favorite activities.
Right. Which sounds kind of obvious on the surface, but...
It does, but the nuances are what make it so easy to overlook.
Yeah.
We are talking about situations where something a child once deeply enjoyed, it suddenly just loses its grip on them.
Okay, but I have to push back on this a little bit, because it sounds good in theory, but let's talk about the practical reality.
Sure.
If you're a parent or a teacher listening to this, and you have 30 kids in a classroom or 3 kids running around your house, you might be thinking, isn't it perfectly normal for kids to just get bored?
That's a very common reaction.
Yeah. Right, because kids pick up hobbies and drop them all the time. One week they love dinosaurs, the next week they don't care at all. So how is a busy adult practically supposed to tell the difference between a natural developmental phase and a massive red flag? To me, it feels like we might just be pathologizing kids being kids.
I get that, but it's a crucial distinction to make. Think of it like the difference between outgrowing a pair of shoes.
Which happens all the time.
Exactly, which is completely natural, versus a child suddenly refusing to walk altogether. What's fascinating here is how the data explicitly defines this. It's not about a gradual shift in interests over a few months. It is about a sudden, inexplicable loss of connection to the things that ground them. So we're talking about, say, a middle schooler who abruptly quits a sport she has loved and dedicated herself to for 2 years, right in the middle of the season.
Right, that sudden drop. Or a child who has always loved art class suddenly just out of nowhere declaring it boring and refusing to participate.
Exactly. Or consider a really heartbreaking example from the source material, a kindergartner who completely stops asking to play with the family dog.
Oh, wow. Yeah, that is heartbreaking.
It is. And when that grip is lost, that is vital information. It's not a phase to just wait out. It is a critical data point that the child's internal world has shifted so drastically and it's become so overwhelming that they just can no longer connect with the external things that used to bring them joy.
They just don't have the energy for it.
Right. They're retreating inward because the outside world takes too much energy to navigate.
So we really have to stop treating these sudden withdrawals as just kids, refining their hobbies. We have to see them as the silent alarms they actually are.
Absolutely.
Because once a child withdraws and loses the things that ground them, that internal chaos starts bleeding into their cognitive bandwidth, which actually explains why we see these sudden, sharp drops in academic performance, which is the second sign.
Yes. It's not just emotional anymore. It becomes very observable.
Right.
The progression moves from emotional withdrawal to a very specific kind of academic struggle. And again, we have to distinguish this from like normal academic challenges.
Like just struggling with a hard math concept.
Right, like a student hitting algebra for the first time and needing a tutor.
Right.
What we're talking about here is a clean break.
Now, here's where it gets really interesting. Because the why behind this clean break completely changes how we view struggling students. According to the briefing, anxiety and depression eat executive function before they touch mood.
That is one of the most profound insights we can take away today, honestly. We traditionally think of anxiety and depression entirely as mood disorders.
We really do.
We look for sadness, we look for crying, we look for behavioral outbursts.
But the executive function goes first. I was thinking about this, and the best analogy I can come up with is a computer.
I like that.
Yeah, so think of executive function as the RAM. It's your working memory, your organization, your ability to initiate a task. When a kid is dealing with severe, unspoken anxiety, it's like having these heavy background apps running on that computer, just eating up all the RAM.
Exactly.
The monitor looks fine, the keyboard is plugged in, the computer doesn't look broken from the outside. But suddenly, it can't process a simple Word document. It just freezes.
That's a perfect way to describe it. And if we look at the neurobiology of that, it makes perfect sense. When a child is experiencing chronic anxiety, their brain is constantly in a state of hypervigilance.
Constantly scanning for danger.
Right. The amygdala, which is the threat detection center, is just working overtime. And that process consumes immense cognitive resources.
Wow.
So when that A student suddenly leaves half their homework assignment blank, or a kid who reads above grade levels suddenly claims they, hate reading, it's not because they forgot the material.
Or decided to just be defiant.
Exactly. It's because their cognitive RAM is completely maxed out by silent internal distress. The brain literally prioritizes surviving the perceived threat over solving a math equation.
That makes so much sense. And because they don't have the words to tell you their RAM is maxed out, the system crashes in other ways, which is terrifying if you don't know what you're looking for, right?
Right, because you just think you have a kid who has suddenly become lazy or difficult.
Exactly. But the reality is their system is completely overloaded. And when the mind is overloaded and lacks the vocabulary to express it, the body takes over the communication.
And this raises an important question. If a child cannot say, I am experiencing severe anxiety, and their executive function is already compromised, how does that distress actually escape?
Yeah, where does it go?
The answer is that they somatize the stress.
Okay, let's break that word down for everyone listening, because somatize sounds like, pretty heavy clinical jargon. What does that actually look like in a kid's daily life?
Sure. Somatization is basically when emotional distress manifests as physical pain. The nervous system routes the psychological anguish directly into the physical body.
Wow.
It's not a metaphor. It's a real physiological response. And a prime example of this from the text is the Sunday night stomachache.
The classic Sunday night stomachache. I mean, every parent listening to this knows exactly what that is.
Right. And historically, adults might dismiss that as a kid just trying to get out of going to school on Monday.
Oh, you're just faking it to stay home.
Exactly. But it's actually the child's body preparing for a threat. Their digestive system is reacting to the massive spike in cortisol and adrenaline that occurs when they think about re-entering an overwhelming environment.
That's incredible.
We also see tension headaches right before tests and persistent deep fatigue that has no underlying medical explanation. The child isn't faking it. The headache is real. The stomachache is real.
The body is ringing the alarm bell because the voice can't. That is, wow. If you're a parent listening right now and you've been treating that Sunday night stomachache with Pepto-Bismol and frustration, this completely flips the script on how you should view Monday mornings.
It really does change everything.
Because none of these, the sudden withdrawal, the clean academic breaks, the physical pain, none of these are signs of weakness or defiance. They are signals. And the earlier we listen to those signals, the smaller the intervention required.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
But identifying these physical and cognitive signals is completely useless if we can't actually treat them. Let's say a teacher successfully decodes that sudden hatred of art class, or a parent realizes the Sunday stomachaches are actually panic attacks.
Yeah, what's next?
What happens on Monday morning?
Well, that is the tragic reality we have to confront next, because you finally get a kid to the point where they're ready for help or a teacher identifies the need, And the current system just throws up a massive brick wall.
It's devastating.
Let's walk through what typically happens. A student finally admits they're struggling, right? The school counselor does an intake, and then they are placed on a wait list. Sometimes for 3 weeks, sometimes for months, just to get a referral to an outside specialist.
And for 3 weeks in the life of a struggling child is an absolute eternity. It is enough time for an academic slide to become a permanent failure or for, mild, manageable anxiety to spiral into a complete acute crisis.
Imagine finally asking for a life preserver and being told one will be mailed to you next month. I mean, it defeats the entire purpose of early intervention.
It really does.
It takes immense courage for a child to finally let their guard down, and when the system tells them to wait, they just put the walls right back up. And this is exactly where MentalSpace School comes in.
Right.
They are operating right now in Georgia, and they are built specifically to bypass this massive waiting game. They're providing comprehensive K-12 mental health support directly within the school ecosystem, utilizing same-day teletherapy.
If we connect this to the bigger picture of healthcare logistics, what MentalSpace School is doing is entirely restructuring the delivery model. It isn't just about the speed of getting someone on a screen, it is about the architecture of the care being provided.
How so?
Well, they assign dedicated therapist teams to each specific school.
And that is a huge departure from the traditional telehealth model, which often feels like just a rotating cast of strangers.
Exactly. Continuity of care is paramount. If a child is already struggling with executive function and it takes all their energy just to process a conversation, the last thing they need is to explain their trauma and their background to a different person every single time they log on.
Right, that sounds exhausting even for an adult.
It is. Having a dedicated team means the therapist becomes a consistent, predictable, and safe part of that specific school's ecosystem. The therapist learns the culture of the school, the administration, and the community.
And that brings up another vital piece of the puzzle. You can have the fastest, most consistent intervention in the world. But if the kid logs on and feels like the person on the screen has absolutely no understanding of their life or their background or their community, they are going to shut down immediately.
Oh, without a doubt.
MentalSpace specifically utilizes clinicians who are licensed, diverse, and culturally competent. They are building teams that actually reflect the student populations they serve.
Which is so important. Because cultural competence in therapy isn't just like a nice buzzword. It is a clinical necessity for establishing trust.
Right.
A therapist needs to understand the cultural nuances of how a family discusses mental health or the specific community stressors a student might be facing in order to actually break through that silent barrier. If the student doesn't feel seen, the therapy simply won't work.
Now, I do have to ask, because when I first hear the phrase same-day teletherapy in schools, my immediate skeptical thought is, okay, is this just a light touch?
Like a Band-Aid solution.
Yeah, like, is this basically just an app for test prep anxiety? Because if we are looking at kids whose executive function has entirely crashed and whose bodies are manifesting severe stress, we're dealing with heavy, complex situations. Can a school-based teletherapy model actually handle that?
It's a vital question, and it's a really common misconception about telehealth. The scope of their services goes far beyond just mild, generalized anxiety. They are fully equipped and staffed for severe crisis intervention.
Really?
Yes, they actively handle suicide and violence prevention protocols.
Wow. Okay. That is a massive level of clinical responsibility to integrate into a school setting.
It is. And they don't stop with the students either. They provide staff wellness support, recognizing that teachers are often carrying the secondary trauma of supporting these students every day.
Teachers are burning out trying to be educators and impromptu social workers at the same time.
Exactly. And MentalSpace also offers family counseling, ensuring that the support system extends right into the home. It is a completely holistic, wraparound service.
So, what does this all mean for the actual execution? Because a great idea on paper is only as good as its implementation, right? And more importantly, its accessibility. Who actually pays for a comprehensive, diverse, same-day intervention team?
That's always the catch, isn't it?
Yeah. If a parent gets a call that their child needs this service, are they suddenly hit with a massive out-of-pocket bill? This brings us to the logistics, and honestly, this is the part that blew my mind the most.
The financial barriers are almost always where these well-intentioned programs collapse. You can have the best therapists in the world, but if the families can't afford them, the pipeline stays broken.
Exactly. But they haven't just partnered with one or two niche providers. They've essentially hardwired themselves into the entire state's financial ecosystem. For families on Medicaid, the cost is exactly $0.
$0. Let's just sit with the impact of that for a second.
It's incredible.
For families navigating the Medicaid system, the financial barrier to same-day, culturally competent mental health care is completely eradicated.
And for families with private insurance, the net is cast incredibly wide. They're in-network with Blue Cross Blue Shield, Cigna, Aetna, United Healthcare, Humana, Peach State, CareSource, and Amerigroup.
That's extensive.
They have made sure that the moment a parent or a student says yes to help, they don't immediately hit a financial brick wall. The care is actually accessible.
Which is exactly what a systemic solution must do. And beyond the financial logistics, there is the regulatory reality. Operating inside a school system means navigating a really complex labyrinth of privacy laws.
Oh, sure.
You are dealing with both healthcare data and educational data. MentalSpace is fully HIPAA and FERPA compliant, meaning both the medical and educational privacy rights of the student are strictly protected.
And there's a very specific legislative shift happening in Georgia right now that makes this even more relevant. Let's talk about House Bill 268. What does that actually mean for these schools in plain English?
House Bill 268 is essentially a legislative mandate in Georgia that forces schools to implement better, more comprehensive student care and mental health protocols. And the deadline for compliance is July 2026. So by integrating directly with a service like MentalSpace now, school districts are essentially future-proofing themselves. They aren't just scrambling to check a legislative box at the last minute. They are adopting a fully operational, compliant infrastructure well ahead of the mandate.
So they have the clinical model built on dedicated, culturally competent teams. They have the financial access that removes the barrier to entry, and they have the regulatory compliance to satisfy state mandates.
Right.
But the ultimate question is, does it actually work? Does getting a kid on a screen the same day they show a sign of distress actually change their trajectory?
The hard outcome data from their implementation provides a very clear answer to that.
Yeah, let's look at that. They're showing an 89% improved attendance rate among the students utilizing the service. Let's just connect the dots on that for a second. 89% improved attendance. Think back to earlier when we talked about those Sunday night stomach aches.
The physical somatization of the anxiety.
Yes. If you treat the root cause, the anxiety, you cure the Sunday night stomach ache. The physical symptom disappears because the nervous system is no longer in a state of hypervigilance.
Exactly.
And suddenly, the kid can actually walk through the front doors of the school on Monday morning. That 89% improved attendance isn't just a dry administrative metric. It is direct, tangible proof that the physical symptoms of distress are being alleviated.
It perfectly validates the earlier theory, and it's reinforced by their clinical metrics, too. They report a 92% reduction in anxiety among the participating students.
92%. That is a staggering number.
It really is. When you combine a 92% reduction in anxiety with the restoration of executive function we discussed earlier, you are fundamentally changing a child's life.
Absolutely.
You give that student their cognitive RAM back, you give them the bandwidth to learn, to socialize, and basically to just be a kid again. And the final metric, 85% family satisfaction, demonstrates that this healing ripples outward.
It affects everybody.
Right. The entire family system feels the relief of having a supported, emotionally regulated child.
It is an incredible full-circle moment for this deep dive. We started out looking at a kindergartner who inexplicably stopped playing with the family dog, and an A student who suddenly couldn't finish a basic homework assignment because their mental RAM was entirely consumed by a silent, invisible struggle.
Yeah.
We learned that we have to decode those quiet signals, the sudden withdrawal, the clean academic breaks, the unexplained physical pain, because those are the desperate cries for help from a nervous system that is completely overwhelmed.
And we explored the tragic reality that waiting weeks for a referral only deepens that crisis, allowing a temporary struggle to calcify into a permanent trauma.
Right. But by utilizing integrated systems like MentalSpace School, which is reaching students across Georgia with same-day, dedicated, culturally competent care, those silent cries are finally being answered immediately. They are completely re-engineering the broken pipeline.
They really are.
If you want to dig deeper into the actual logistics of how they are partnering with schools, you can find them at mentalspaceschool.com or reach out to their team directly at MentalSpace School at sixtherapy.com.
It truly is a powerful testament to what happens when we stop waiting for children to magically find the vocabulary for their pain and start building accessible systems that can actually hear and treat their silence.
Well, we have covered a tremendous amount of ground today. from the hidden neurobiology of childhood anxiety to the practical mechanics of integrating healthcare directly into our K-12 education system. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive and letting us share these vital insights with you.
Before we go, though, I want to leave you with one final thought to mull over long after you finish listening. We've spent all this time talking about how a child's nervous system speaks through physical symptoms, like those Sunday stomach aches and unexplained test day headaches, because they simply lack the vocabulary to express their internal stress. But I want you to think about your own life for a moment. What might your own unexplained physical complaints, that lingering tension headache you get every Thursday, that tightness in your jaw, or that exhaustion you just can't seem to sleep off? What might they be trying to tell you about the adult anxieties you haven't yet found the words to express?
Wow. That is definitely something to think about. Until next time, take care of yourselves and take care of each other.